The storm had already swallowed the mountain. Snow crashed through the trees, the wind screamed between cliffs, and somewhere beneath a fallen pine, for tiny wolf pups were slowly freezing to death. Everyone else had fled the mountain, but one woman walked toward the cries. Her name was Elara, and only hours earlier, her own kingdom had thrown her out into the wilderness with nothing but a torn cloak, a small knife, and enough food for one night. They had called her a thief. They had called her a traitor. They had left her to die. Yet when Elara found 4 helpless wolf pups trapped beneath the ice, she didn't think about the kingdom that had betrayed her. She didn't think about her own empty stomach. She didn't even think about surviving the storm. She tore her only cloak apart and wrapped the freezing pups inside it. One by one, she pulled them against her chest, using her own body to keep them alive. But Elara didn't know something. She wasn't alone. High above the ravine, hidden behind the falling snow, a powerful man was watching every move she made. King Kaelen, the Alpha King of Frostfang, the ruler whose kingdom had been at war with Valedorn for years. And the 4 pups Elara was risking her life to save weren't ordinary wolves. They belonged to him, his missing royal bloodline. Kaelen had spent weeks searching for them. He had believed they were dead. But now he was watching the woman his enemies had condemned crawl into a deadly storm to save them. And as one tiny pup opened its eyes and revealed a silver crescent beneath its ear, Kaelen realized something far more frightening than the storm. The woman he had been taught to hate might be the only person who could save his kingdom. The storm was strong enough to tear trees from the mountainside. Snow raced across the ground like white smoke, swallowing the narrow mountain paths one by one. Somewhere beneath that frozen roar, 4 tiny wolf pups were crying. And crawling toward them through the blizzard was a woman who had already lost everything. 3 days earlier, Elara had still belonged to Valedorn. Not as a noblewoman. Not as someone whose name was carved into stone or spoken with respect at the royal table. She had been the quiet keeper of the royal wolf kennels, the woman who knew which old wolf needed softer food, which injured paw needed wrapping, and which frightened pup needed a hand resting gently against its fur. She had never asked for much. A small room, a warm fire, enough bread to last the week. And perhaps, someday, a place where nobody looked at her as though kindness were a weakness. Then King Garrick had summoned her before the court. The accusation had been simple. Medicine meant for the royal wolves had disappeared. And somehow, the royal guards had found Elara's name written beside the missing supplies. She had stood beneath the enormous stone arches of the throne hall while hundreds of eyes watched her. "I did not take it," she had whispered. But the king had already made his decision. His face had remained cold. "Then perhaps you should have been more careful about where you left your name," the court had murmured. Elara had searched the faces around her, hoping someone would speak. Nobody did. Not the kennel master. Not the guard she had worked beside for years. Not even the old servant who had once called her daughter. By sunset, she had been given a torn wool cloak, a small knife, and 1 loaf of bread. Then the gates of Valedorn had closed behind her. The sound had stayed with her. Iron grinding against iron. A final, heavy judgment. She had walked north without looking back. The mountains waited beyond the kingdom's borders, dark and silent beneath the coming winter. By the 3rd day, the first snow had begun. Elara found an old shepherd's trail and followed it toward a ruined hut she remembered from childhood. The hut had once belonged to a shepherd named Tomas, a gentle old man who used to trade milk for herbs. Years ago, she had spent one summer there helping him care for injured sheep. If the roof had survived, perhaps she could survive the night. But the mountain had changed. Snow covered the trail. The trees groaned under the weight of ice. The sky had turned the color of iron. Elara pulled her torn cloak tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. Her boots were soaked. Her fingers had gone numb. She could no longer feel the tips of her ears. Still, she walked. Then she heard it. A sound beneath the wind. So faint she almost ignored it. A whimper. Elara stopped. The snow moved across the ground in long, pale waves. She listened. There it was again. A tiny cry. Then another. She turned toward the ravine. The safest thing would have been to keep walking. The hut was somewhere ahead. The storm was getting worse. Whatever was making those sounds was not her responsibility. Elara closed her eyes. For one heartbeat, she imagined herself walking away. Then she remembered the wolves she had cared for at the castle. She remembered how frightened animals looked when they realized nobody was coming. Her eyes opened. She turned toward the ravine. The wind struck her face, so hard that she stumbled. But she kept going. At the bottom of the slope, she found the fallen pine. Its enormous trunk had crashed across a hollow between two rocks, burying the snow beneath it. And underneath that snow came 4 tiny cries. Elara dropped to her knees. No. She brushed the snow away with bare hands. A small white face appeared. Then another. 4 wolf pups were trapped beneath the branches. Their fur was wet. Their bodies were trembling. One had blood frozen around its paw. Another could barely lift its head. Elara looked at the tree. It was far too heavy. She could not move it, but she could make a space. She dug. Her fingernails split against the ice. The wind burned her cheeks. Snow filled the sleeves of her dress. Still, she dug. When she finally made enough room to crawl inside, she pushed her torn cloak around the pups. The smallest pup pressed its nose against her wrist. Alara's lips trembled. You poor little things. She broke her last piece of bread into 4 pieces. Each pup received one. She kept nothing. Then she pulled them against her chest. The cold entered her body like a blade. But the pups were warmer against her. So she held them tighter. Above the ravine, hidden behind a wall of snow-covered rocks, a mounted figure had stopped. King Kaelen of Frostfang stared down into the storm. His warriors waited behind him. He had come searching for 4 missing royal wolf pups. For weeks, he had believed them dead. Now, through the snow, he saw a woman from Valedorn holding them against her heart. Kaelen's hand tightened around the reins. He had every reason to hate her kingdom, but he could not look away. Because the woman everyone had cast away was giving the last warmth she possessed to creatures that were not even hers. And Kaelen had not yet seen the most dangerous thing she was about to do. Night came quickly. The storm erased the mountains until there was nothing left except white darkness and the sound of the wind. Elara could no longer feel her hands. The 4 pups were pressed beneath her cloak, their tiny bodies rising and falling against her chest. She knew she could not stay beneath the tree. If she remained there until morning, none of them would survive. So she crawled out. For a moment, she could barely stand. Her knees shook. Her vision blurred. But she gathered the pups one by one. 2 went inside her cloak. 1 rested against her shoulder. The smallest she carried against her heart. Then she began walking. Kaelen watched from the ridge. He had been trained since childhood to recognize danger. A stranger crossing a frozen border. A woman carrying royal wolves. A storm strong enough to kill a mounted warrior. Everything about the scene demanded suspicion. Yet suspicion could not explain what he was seeing. The woman stumbled. She fell to one knee. 1 pup slipped from her arms. She immediately crawled through the snow to retrieve it. She did not check herself. She checked the pup. Kaelen looked at his captain. Stay here. The captain stared at him. My king, do not move. Kaelen dismounted. He followed her on foot. He did not want her to see him. Not yet. The woman kept walking toward an old stone shelter half buried beneath the snow. By the time she reached it, her legs were barely holding her. She pushed open the broken wooden door. Darkness waited inside. She stepped through, then collapsed. The pups spilled gently from her arms. Elara dragged herself toward them. Come here. Her voice was barely louder than the storm. She gathered the pups together. The shelter had no firewood, no blankets, no food, only cracked stone walls and a roof that leaked snow. Elara looked around. Then she noticed an old wooden crate. She broke it apart with her knife. Piece by piece. She struck the wood against a stone until her hands bled. Finally, a spark caught. A tiny flame appeared. Elara leaned toward it. The fire grew. Not much, but enough. Outside, Kaelen stood in the darkness. He watched through the broken wall. The woman removed her cloak. Beneath it, She wore a thin dress completely soaked from the storm. She wrapped the cloak around the pups instead. Kaelen's expression changed. He had seen soldiers die, without begging. He had seen kings betray brothers. He had seen men burn villages because a border had moved 2 miles. But this woman had nothing. And she was still giving. Elara took the last piece of bread from her pocket.
She stared at it.
Her stomach twisted with hunger. Then she broke it. 1 piece.
2.
3.
4.
The pups ate. Elara smiled. It was a small smile. Almost invisible. But Kaelen saw it. Then one of the pups moved. Its paw slipped from the cloak. Moonlight fell across its fur. Kaelen froze. A silver crescent appeared beneath its ear. The ancient mark of Frostfang's royal bloodline. His breath stopped. For weeks, his kingdom had mourned 4 missing pups. They had been stolen during a border attack. Kaelen had searched every forest, every valley, every village. He had sent riders into snowstorms. He had questioned smugglers. He had threatened criminals. Nothing. And now they were here.
Alive.
4 royal wolf pups. Sleeping beneath the cloak of a woman from Valedorn. Kaelen stepped into the shelter. Elara woke instantly. She reached for her knife. The movement was weak but fast. Kaelen stopped. Firelight touched his face. Elara stared at him. She knew who he was. Everyone in Valedorn knew. King Kaelen. The rival Alpha King. The ruler whose name mothers used to frighten children into behaving. His dark coat was covered in snow. A sword hung at his side. 2 guards appeared behind him. Elara's fingers tightened around the knife. Stay back. Kaelen glanced at the blade. Then, at the pups. You saved them. Elara said nothing. Kaelen stepped closer. She raised the knife higher. I said stay back. Something in her voice made him stop. Not fear.
Exhaustion.
The kind of exhaustion that came after someone had already lost too much. Kaelen lowered his hand. I am not here to hurt you. Elara gave a weak laugh. Kings always say that. For the first time, Kaelen had no answer. He looked toward the pups. One of them opened its eyes. The silver crescent was unmistakable. Kaelen's face hardened. His kingdom had not lost the pups. Someone had taken them, and someone had left them here to die. He looked back at Elara. Where did you find them? In the ravine. Who was with you? No one. Why did you save them? Elara looked down at the sleeping animals. Her fingers gently brushed snow from one tiny ear. Because they were crying. Kaelen stared at her. Such a simple answer. Yet it struck him harder than any accusation. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains. And somewhere far beyond the shelter, another sound answered.
Horns.
Kaelen turned toward the door. Elara saw his expression change. What is it? Kaelen looked into the darkness. Your king. The horns came again. Closer. Kaelen's warriors moved immediately. Steel whispered from its sheath. Elara pushed herself upright. The 4 pups stirred. What does Garrick want? Kaelen looked at her. You. Elara's face went pale.
Why?
Because you know something. I don't know anything. Kaelen studied her carefully. You were accused of stealing medicine. Elara's eyes narrowed. Who told you? I've been watching the border for weeks. She stared at him. Kaelen continued quietly. The medicine was never stolen by you. Elara looked toward the fire. Her silence was answer enough. Kaelen crouched near the pups. He did not touch them. The medicine disappeared the same week my pups were taken. Elara looked at him. Your pups. Kaelen nodded. Royal wolves. Their bloodline is older than either of our kingdoms. He pointed toward the silver crescent. They were born in Frostfang. Elara's eyes moved from the marking to his face. Then why were they in Valedorn? I don't know. A strange silence filled the shelter. For the first time, Elara saw something beneath Kaelen's royal armor.
Pain.
He had been searching for them. Perhaps every day. Perhaps every night. And suddenly the man she had been taught to hate looked less like a monster and more like someone who had been carrying a wound for too long. Kaelen noticed a strip of cloth near the pups. He picked it up. Blood stained one edge. The fabric was deep blue, a royal color. His expression changed. This was tied around one of them when they were taken. Elara frowned. Then someone from your kingdom had them. Kaelen looked at the doorway. Or someone who wanted me to believe that. Outside, snow struck the walls. Then came the sound of boots. Many boots. Kaelen stood. His warriors formed a line. Elara gathered the pups. They will kill me. Not if I can stop them. She stared at him.
Why?
Kaelen's answer was quiet. Because you saved what belongs to my family. The door shook. A voice called from outside. Elara. By order of King Garrick, surrender immediately. Her hands began to tremble. Kaelen noticed. He stepped closer. Is there another way out? Elara looked toward the rear wall. There is an old passage. Kaelen followed her gaze. A narrow opening was hidden beneath fallen stones. Where does it lead? The mount.
Good.
He picked up 2 pups. Elara took the other 2. The door shook again. Wood cracked. Kaelen's captain looked toward him. My king. Go. The warriors disappeared into the passage first. Elara followed. Kaelen stayed behind. What are you doing? Buying us time. Kaelen. He looked at her. Go. The door exploded inward. Snow rushed through the shelter. Men entered.
Kaelen moved.
The fight was brief and brutal. Steel flashed against steel. A soldier fell. Another stumbled into the fire. Kaelen drove the others back. Then he ran. He entered the passage just as an arrow struck the stone beside his head. Elara had already disappeared into darkness. Kaelen followed. The passage twisted beneath the mountain. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Only the pups made tiny sounds. At last they emerged into a narrow forest valley. Elara stopped. She looked back. The mountain swallowed the entrance behind them. We're safe. Kaelen shook his head.
No.
He pointed toward the snow. Fresh footprints crossed the valley. Someone had been there recently. Elara's stomach tightened. Then they found the old watchtower. Its door stood open. Kaelen entered first. The tower was empty, but something had been carved into the stone wall. A royal seal. Garrick's seal. Beneath it were several words. Kaelen stepped closer. Elara stood beside him. The message was short, but its meaning was horrifying. The pups had not been stolen for ransom. They had been stolen to start a war. Kaelen slowly turned toward Elara. Garrick wanted me to attack Valedorn. Elara looked at the seal. And he needed you to believe we killed them. Kaelen's jaw tightened. And you were blamed because you found out where the medicine went. Elara remembered the royal kennels. The missing records. The guards carrying sealed crates. The accusation. Suddenly, everything fit. But before either of them could speak, a torch appeared outside. Then another. Then 10 more. The tower was surrounded. Kaelen looked through the narrow window. Garrick's soldiers stood below.
Too many to fight.
Elara held the pups close. There's no way out. Kaelen searched the tower. Then he noticed an old stone stairway behind a collapsed wall. He pushed the stones aside. A narrow passage descended into darkness. Elara followed. The tunnel opened into a frozen forest. They ran. Snow reached Elara's knees. Kaelen carried 2 pups beneath his cloak while Elara carried the other 2. For the first time, she saw him without his crown. No throne. No army. No court. Only a man running through snow because 4 helpless creatures needed him. They reached a frozen river. An old wooden bridge stretched across it. Kaelen stepped forward. The first plank cracked.
He stopped.
Wait. He tested another. The ice beneath the bridge groaned. Elara looked behind them. Torches moved between the trees. They're coming. Kaelen turned. Stay here.
No.
You can't cross this. Neither can you. Kaelen looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was tired. Almost gentle. Then we crossed together. They stepped onto the bridge. One plank snapped. Elara cried out. Kaelen caught her wrist. The bridge tilted. One of the pups slipped. Kaelen dropped to his knees and grabbed it before it fell through the broken boards. The river roared beneath them. For one terrible moment, All 4 pups were safe, but the bridge was collapsing. Kaelen pushed the animals toward Elara. Take them. What about you? I'll follow. The rope holding the bridge snapped. Kaelen jumped. He landed hard on the opposite bank. Elara followed with the pups. The bridge disappeared into the river behind them. For several seconds they simply stood there, breathing, alive. Elara looked at Kaelen. You could have fallen. So could you. You didn't have to save me. Kaelen looked at the 4 pups. You saved them first. Something changed between them then. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter. Trust. They continued through the forest until they found an abandoned watchtower. Inside, Kaelen built a fire. Elara sat beside it with the pups. One small wolf crawled into her lap. She smiled. Kaelen watched. You should sleep. So should you. I have spent years sleeping badly. Elara looked at him. Because of the war? Because of everything. The answer was so honest that she did not ask more. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, the fire crackled. For one brief moment, the world felt still. Then Elara noticed something beneath the tower floor. A loose stone. She lifted it. Underneath was a leather pouch. Inside were records. Names. Dates. Payments. Garrick's guards had been paid to move medicine away from the royal kennels. They had also been paid to transport the wolf pups across the border. Elara's hands shook. I knew it. Kaelen took the records. His face hardened, but there was something worse. A final document carried Garrick's signature. It ordered the pups to be left in the mountains during the storm. Kaelen's eyes closed. They were meant to die. Elara looked at the 4 sleeping pups. They didn't.
No.
Kaelen looked at her. Because you found them. Outside, another horn sounded. This time it was not Garrick's army. It came from the valley below. Kaelen looked toward the darkness. Our enemies know where we are. And somewhere beyond the trees, hundreds of soldiers were already moving toward them. They returned to Valedorn before dawn. Not as prisoners. Not as fugitives. But as witnesses. Kaelen's trusted riders carried the 4 pups inside covered wagons while Elara rode beside them. The journey was silent. She watched the walls of Valedorn rise from the mist. The same walls that had once thrown her into the wilderness. Her hands tightened around the reins. Kaelen noticed. You don't have to go inside. Elara looked at the kingdom. I do.
Why?
Because if I don't, he wins. Kaelen nodded. At the gates, Garrick's guards surrounded them. The king himself appeared on the battlements. His face twisted when he saw Kaelen. Enemy king. Then he saw the pups. His expression changed. Only for a moment. But Elara saw it.
Fear.
Real fear. Garrick ordered the gates closed. Arrest them. The guards hesitated. Kaelen stepped forward. Before you obey him, look at what he ordered. He held up the documents. The guards began whispering. Garrick shouted. Forged. Elara stepped forward. For years, she had been invisible. Now, the entire kingdom was looking at her. She reached into her cloak. She removed a small bundle of papers. The original medicine records. The ones she had hidden before her banishment. Garrick's face went white. Elara handed them to the captain of the royal guard. Read them. The captain did. His expression changed. Then another guard took the papers. Then another. The truth moved through the courtyard like fire through dry grass. The medicine had never been stolen. Garrick's men had taken it. The wolves had never been killed by Valedorn. They had been stolen to provoke Frostfang. And Elara had been blamed because she had unknowingly stood too close to the truth. Garrick descended from the battlements. You think this proves anything? His hand moved toward a sword. Kaelen stepped between him and Elara.
Garrick drew.
The court guards drew theirs. For one moment, everyone waited. Then the 4 pups began to cry. Their mother was nowhere near them. But the sound carried across the courtyard. A great silver she-wolf appeared beyond the gates. She had followed the scent of her children. She walked slowly through the crowd. Everyone moved aside. She approached the wagon. One pup crawled toward her. Then another. Then all 4. The silver wolf lowered her head. Her nose touched each pup.
Alive. Safe.
Home. A silence fell over the courtyard. Kaelen looked at Garrick. You started a war for power. Garrick's soldiers looked at their king, then at the pups, then at the records. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Garrick's face twisted with rage. You will regret this. Nobody moved. His own guard stepped forward, not toward Elara.
Toward him.
The king who had ruled through fear suddenly stood alone. His crown was removed before the entire court, and the woman he had cast into the wilderness watched without hatred. Only relief. Kaelen looked at her. You won. Elara shook her head.
No.
She looked at the pups. They did. Spring arrived slowly. Snow disappeared from the lower valleys first. Then the rivers broke free. Then tiny green shoots appeared beneath the ancient trees. For the first time in years, Valedorn and Frostfang stood without armies, facing one another. There had been no war. No burning villages. No widows waiting beside gates. Only because one woman had stopped walking when she heard 4 tiny cries beneath the snow. Kaelen returned the pups to their mother in the northern valley. He had imagined that moment for months. But when it finally came, he did not speak. He simply watched. The great silver wolf lowered her head. The 4 pups rushed toward her. They disappeared into her thick fur. Elara stood several steps away, her eyes filled with tears. Kaelen noticed. You saved them. Elara shook her head. I only found them. Kaelen looked at her. Sometimes finding someone when they are lost is the greatest thing you can do. Elara smiled. Months later, Kaelen offered her a position in Frostfang. Not as a servant, not as a political reward. He wanted her to become keeper of the royal wolves. Elara listened. Then she asked one question. What happens when someone innocent becomes inconvenient? Kaelen understood. You will never be cast out for telling the truth. And if a king makes that mistake, then the kingdom should have the courage to stop him. Only then did she accept. She moved to a small stone cottage beneath the royal cliffs. There were gardens around it, a warm kitchen, a wooden table, a fireplace, and 4 young wolves who visited almost every morning. They grew quickly. Their white coats became thick and bright. The silver crescent beneath their ears became more visible. People came from distant villages to see them. Children left pieces of meat outside Elara's gate. Old farmers brought apples. Travelers stopped simply to hear the wolves howl beneath the moon. And whenever Elara walked into the valley, the 4 wolves came running. They never forgot her. Years passed. The woman who had once been thrown outside Valedorn's gates became one of the most respected people in both kingdoms. But she never asked for a title. She never wore jewels. She still preferred simple dresses. Still ate beside the fire. Still stopped when she heard an animal crying. One spring morning, Elara stood beneath the cliffs, watching the 4 wolves race through the grass. They were no longer pups. They were powerful young wolves now. The silver she-wolf watched from the ridge. Kaelen approached quietly. Elara heard his footsteps. You came. I always do. She smiled. The wolves suddenly turned. All 4 ran toward Elara. They reached her together. The largest lowered its head. Another pressed against her side. A third rested its muzzle against her hand.
The 4th simply sat at her feet.
Elara laughed softly. Kaelen watched. He remembered the woman in the storm. The torn cloak. The frozen hands. The last piece of bread. The tiny bodies held against her heart. He had seen her when nobody else had. Before the court knew her name. Before the kingdoms knew the truth. Before anyone called her brave. He had watched her choose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. And perhaps that was why he had never been able to forget her. Elara looked toward the mountains. The peaks were green now. Snow remained only on the highest ridges. The same mountains that had nearly killed her had become the place where her life began again. She looked at Kaelen. I used to think being alone meant nobody wanted you. He said nothing. She continued. Now I think sometimes the wilderness removes the people who were never meant to stay. Kaelen smiled. The wind moved through the grass. The wolves lifted their heads. Then one by one, they began to howl. Their voices rose into the clear spring sky. Villagers in the valley stopped working. Children looked toward the mountains. And on the highest ridge, the Silver Mother answered. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to breathe as one living thing. Elara stood among the wolves. Not rejected, not forgotten, not alone. The kingdom had once believed she was weak because she had chosen compassion over power. But they had misunderstood her. She had not survived the storm because she was stronger than the mountain. She had survived because, even while the world was trying to freeze her heart, she had refused to let it become cold. And that was why the wolves remembered her. That was why Kaelen trusted her. That was why two kingdoms found peace. And that was why, long after the story of King Garrick had faded into old history, people still told the story of the woman who had been cast out with nothing and walked into a deadly storm caring for lives she refused to let die. Because sometimes the person a kingdom throws away is the very person who saves it. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is not defeating an enemy. It is choosing to remain kind when the world has given you every reason not to be.